Hi class, as we begin our first paper, I wanted to talk a little bit about how to write an introductory paragraph. For some, that's the hardest thing to write, and that's okay. And quite honestly, even though it's the first thing that you see in a paper, it doesn't mean that you have to write it first. Sometimes if I'm having trouble, I'll just simply write a thesis statement, right? So I know what my paper is going to be about, and then I'll just start with the body paragraphs, and then I'll come back to the introductory paragraph later. But I do feel that the introductory paragraph is very important because it makes a first impression, right? A good introductory paragraph makes your reader want to read your paper. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in this video, give you some examples, something that I wrote, and also we'll take a look at one of the readings from the unit as well. Okay, so I'll just kind of quickly go through this. What's the purpose? Why is it important? Well, think of it this way. It acts as a bridge that transports your readers from their own lives into the place of your analysis. So, let's face it, in today's high-tech, fast-paced world, it takes a lot to grab our attention, right? Especially as we talked about when it comes time to read, right? By staring at a screen, our brains are now used to taking in information at a quick pace. So when it comes time to do good old-fashioned reading, we tend to drift away. So it's important for us to snag our readers' attention to make them want to read our paper. Again, why is this important? First impressions are crucial. Good introductions make the reader want to read your paper, right? And since I will be giving you a grade, you want to make me want to read your paper as well. Okay. So again, the goals. What does an introductory paragraph do? It captures the reader's interest, right? It introduces the topic. And finally, it makes a claim or you express your opinion in a thesis statement. Now, in longer papers, and this is something that we'll work towards by the end of the semester, I feel like an introductory paragraph doesn't have to be an introductory paragraph. It could be an introductory section. So my goal for you in this class, not with this first paper, but by the end of the semester, that you can write a 1, 2, maybe 3-page paragraph section, right? That's an introductory section. And anyway, it creates a roadmap for the rest of your paper. All right. What I usually do in my face-to-face classes is I'll go through this and I'll ask, we'll do this in class and I'll ask you guys to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down, right? If as we go through each one of these. So pretend this is the first thing that you read on your paper. So think about this. Does it grab your attention? Why or why not? And I will talk about each one as we go. Okay, so the first one, slap, right? That grabbed my attention, right? I want to know, who or what got slapped, what's going on, okay? Now, you won't find this kind of introduction, this kind of attention grabber in a formal paper, right? But in a personal narrative, maybe even something like this first paper, because I'm allowing you to use I, that would work, okay? What about this one? Having my first baby was an experience I will never, ever forget. Maybe. Seems kind of dull a little bit though, right? I like slap better. What about this one? Since the very beginning of time, human beings have lied to each other. I don't know, maybe. That's a bold statement. Kind of works a little bit, maybe. I don't know what you think. What about this one? She was falling 1,000 feet per second faster. She reached behind her for the ripcord. She reached again. I like this one, right? This kind of puts you in right away it puts you in a situation where you're trying to figure out, what's going on. Okay, so that's good. Honesty is not always the best policy. Maybe. I like that though, because they flip the whole idea of honesty as the best policy. That's what we've been taught, right, since we were small children. But here they're kind of flipping that. It's not always the best policy. So it does kind of grab my attention. So these are different ways. There is a worksheet also that I posted, so be sure and download that. It gives you some other strategies. Okay, but back to the importance of an introductory paragraph. Other ways you can capture your reader's interest. Let's say you're writing a paper on Frederick Douglass, right? You would need a transition to help your reader leave behind the world of the 21st century and to help them temporarily enter the world of the 19th century slavery, right? So remember, we're talking about that bridge. What would you do? Well, you could begin with a question. Some instructors don't like that. I think it's fine. If you begin an essay with a provocative question, you're forcing, you've done your, right? You've grabbed your reader's attention because they have to think about an answer. Even, can you imagine what it was like to grow up during the time of slavery? Or even something like this. What if you woke up tomorrow and all of your freedoms were taken away? You think about that. And if you think about the question that was asked, then I argue that you've captured your reader's attention. Okay? Or you can begin with a quote. To educate a man is to unfit him to be a slave. Maybe there's a quote from one of the readings that you like. Right? Think about that. Okay? What I don't like is something like this. This is what I don't like papers that start like this. In this essay, I will explain why Rosa Parks was an important figure. Boring. Don't say what you're going to do. This is called a declaration. Your thesis will say that. I am going to write about, no. Instead, maybe try something like this, right? If you're going to write that paper on Rosa Parks, what about this? A Michigan museum recently paid $492,000 for an old, dilapidated bus from Montgomery, Alabama. You might be thinking, why would somebody pay nearly $500,000 for an old bus? Especially somebody that had no idea. If he had some prior knowledge, you might think, okay, the bus boycott, Montgomery, Alabama, I kind of see where this was going. But if not, but notice how it starts off really broad, rather than, in this essay, I will explain why Rosa Parks was an important figure. Okay? Then I'm going to quickly go through this next one. The next thing you want to do is after you've introduced the topic, right? After you begin with a good hook and attention grabber, you want to introduce the topic. You want to prepare the reader for your thesis statement. So here's an example, right? There's that hook. Here's the topic. The old yellow bus was reported to be the very one that sparked the civil rights movement when a young woman named Rosa Parks, okay? So we've gone from the hook. Now we're introducing the topic, and the topic in this case is, Rosa Parks. And finally, you end up with your thesis statement, right? The thesis statement is that single sentence that the rest of the paper must prove. It is your claim, right? It is a claim that is debatable. It is a claim that has to be proven with evidence. And for your paper, for this first paper, the evidence, as I said, could be your personal experience, but it's also going to be quotes from the readings. All right? So here's an example. In refusing to surrender her seat to a white man, Rosa Parks inspired a courageous freedom movement that lives on even today. Okay? So there would be an example of a thesis statement. Okay, so before this semester, I began a paper. I had the class write something called an educational autobiography. But this semester I did something a little bit different. You wrote your letter. Thought that was a little more personable. But I'm going to share with you my introductory paragraph, my hook, my attention grabber. And it might be familiar because I used some of this stuff to my letter, right? In my letter that I wrote you. But again, this is how I started right? I've had many embarrassing moments in my life, but trying to present an oral report on osteoporosis in my 7th grade class might be the worst, right? So I started off with an attention grabber, right? I grabbed my reader's attention. and then I start to go into the topic, right? As a child, I was extremely shy and sometimes stuttered when I talk in front of people. On that infamous day in 1987, the entire world, or at least my entire world at the time, became enlightened about my condition. What I do not remember much about that day, while I do not remember much about that day, I do remember stuttering and stammering over that simple word, osteoporosis. As I continued to try and force the word out of my mouth, the anxiety mounted to the point where I simply gave up and ran out of the classroom. Yep, during this flight moment, I fled, literally. So as you can see, I'm right. I began with my attention grabber. I introduced the topic. Excuse me. And I end up with my thesis statement. And for this paper, the thesis statement was just simply to describe your educational experience up to this point. So here it goes. There have been many rewarding moments, but most of my time, those moments came with a price. My educational experience is one that resembles the path of a roller coaster with plenty of peaks and valleys with lots of twists and turns. All right, so that was my thesis for my introductory paragraph there. Okay, I also wanted to go back and return to the student fear factor because at the beginning of each chapter, Rebecca Cox does essentially the same thing, right? She is, she's beginning with a hook, an attention grabber, right? To kind of grab the reader's attention and kind of let us know what this chapter is going to be about. So we know the chapter is called the student fear factor, right? And then look what she does, right? She provides that story about Eva, right? Yeah. So if you read it, right, I would not have expected Eva to panic during her first composition class. Eva's reports of her high school preparation for college, her prior experiences in English class, and her attitude toward writing in general all suggested that she would feel optimistic about Comp 1A. And we know, because we read the story, right? It goes on to talk about, she really sets it up nicely, right? She paints this picture of a student who was totally ready to go to school, right? She tells us a story about Eva, right? She was all ready to go. She had the commitment. I think she had the attitude. And then we have quotes from her such as, "Oh my God, I'm not going to be able to make it." Just the fact that she said, "Oh, you get an essay after an essay after an essay," that's what scared me. And I think that's good, right? Because all this ties into the idea of the subject of this chapter, the student fear factor. And then she slowly, right, after this story, this whole paragraph is a hook, then she slowly begins to introduce the topic, just like I showed you in the PowerPoint, right? She introduces her topic, and then basically this can be seen as a thesis statement. She, basically tells us what the chapter is going to be about. Chapter 2 explores the phenomenon, the nature, and the source of students' anxiety and the strategies for managing those fears that students employ. So hopefully you can see, right? You saw some examples. You saw some examples from my paper. You saw some examples in this article. That's, this is very important. It's important to not jump right into it. Right? We want to kind of set the tone, right? Get our readers interested in what we have to say. Thanks for listening.